Peace. It's great to see you again. Today we're going to be talking about a very mysterious person. He was so mysterious that no one ever seen his birth certificate. No one knows when or where or even if he died, and he had more aliases than the Wu-Tang Clan. He went by names like W.F. Muhammad, W.D. Muhammad, W.F. Farad, Wallace Farad, and W.D. Farad. Some called him Mahdi, some called him God in the person, others referred to him as the Savior, and some called him a prophet. Well, let me just get right into it and tell you how all of this came about. Back in the 1800s, there was a man named Alfonso who lived in the East. Alfonso came from a very wealthy and educated family, and he had a bunch of brothers. One of his brothers was always getting into something. As a matter of fact, they oftentimes referred to that brother as Shabazz. They saw Shabazz as a descendant of a relative 50,000 years ago. Legend has it that Shabazz is the one who actually explored Africa and mastered all of the jungles and the landscape. Anyway, Alfonso's brother got caught up in a situation where he was stranded in the West for a very long time. Shabazz and his family were there for so long that they didn't even know about their relatives in the East. Alfonso tried to get over to the West to help him, but he couldn't make it. So he came up with a brilliant idea: to have a child, to teach that child all about his ancestors, and to instruct him to get to the West to find his uncle. So Alfonso looked around, but eventually marched all the way to the Caucasus Mountains to find him a bride. Yeah, that's where the word Caucasian comes from, Caucasus. So when Alfonso arrived in the Caucasus Mountains, it didn't take long for him to find his wife, his bae, his soulmate, Baby G, a righteous Caucasian woman. Now, before we go any further, let me just talk about this right here, because I know some of you are sitting here thinking, with all of those beautiful women of color, Alfonso's going to go all the way to the Caucasus Mountains and find him a snowflake? Well, let me just explain it for you. In 1789, the U.S. Constitution gave Congress absolute authority over immigration law. So by the 1800s, Congress began to limit the amount of immigrants that were allowed to come into the country. Most of those limitations were specifically for people who came from the East. So most people who looked like Alfonso, who came from Asia or Africa, were restricted from coming into the United States. Alfonso knew that if he had a child with a Caucasian woman, that it was a good possibility that that child's complexion would allow them to pass through the immigration restrictions on black and brown people. The first child they had was a little girl, but she was darker skinned. The second child they had was a little boy who was fair-skinned. That child's name was W.D. Farad. Although no one has seen his birth certificate, legend has it that Farad was born on February 26, 1877 in the East. Some argue that his birthplace was Mecca in Arabia. Other people say that it was in India. Some even say it was in New Zealand. One thing that we can all agree on is that he wasn't born in the tropical paradise of Bora Bora. Because of his family's wealth and resources, Farad got the best of what education could offer, starting with being instructed by his own uncles. His father even paid for private lessons to study subjects that you couldn't even get in school. As legend has it, his whole life revolved around education. And there's no stories of Farad having a girlfriend or playing sports. He was somewhat of a golden child to his family because even his uncles saw him as the best of what all of them had to offer. As a grown man, he was well prepared for his mission to reach his uncle and his family members here in the West. So before Farad revealed himself in America, at the age of 53 on July 4th, 1930, he tested those immigration waters by coming in and out of the country. When Farad finally decided to connect with his people, he settled in Detroit, Michigan, more specifically, an area known as Black Bottom or Paradise Valley. He posed as a door-to-door silk salesman. Now keep in mind that this is 1930 in the midst of the Great Depression, so a lot of people didn't have money to buy silk. They didn't even have enough money to buy food in many cases. But he used this as a means to attract. And when he would talk to community members, he would share these amazing stories about their ancestors in the East. Eventually, Farad became quite popular to people in Paradise Valley, and some began to invite him into their homes for dinner. It was during this time that he would expand on those amazing stories of their ancestors in the East. And regardless of what his dietary restrictions were, he would eat whatever they served. With that growing popularity, Farad began to coordinate meetings in homes and in commercial spaces so that people could learn more. Some of those people were already exposed to similar ideas through leaders such as Marcus Garvey, Noble Drew Ali, and others who came before Farad revealed himself in 1930. There were many people that Farad taught during that time, but one person I wanted to talk about in particular, his name was Elijah Poole, more respectfully known as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. When these two got together, they hung out for about 3.5 years and nearly saw each other every single day. That relationship gave birth to a very comprehensive manual known as the Supreme Wisdom Lessons, a book that was completed on February 20th, 1934. This book contained the teachings of W.D. Farad and was the basis of what came to be known as the Nation of Islam. If you weren't a member of the Nation of Islam, then you would never have access to this book. As Supreme Wisdom, it contained actual facts about the planet's geography, lessons in history, and various different sciences of life that you wouldn't find in a college curriculum. In addition to the original rules of instruction and the problem book, which taught mathematical equations to explain the condition of our people in the West, this book contained 120 lessons that members were encouraged to learn by heart. Following the completion of the Supreme Wisdom book in 1934, Farad just simply disappeared. And to this day, no one can tell you with a surety where he went or even what happened to him. His life was already mysterious, but it was at this point that things really began to get strange. After Farad's disappearance, Elijah Muhammad stepped up as the leader of what came to be known as the Nation of Islam. And the Supreme Wisdom Lessons became the basis of its teachings, which was far different than traditional Islam. In addition, Elijah Muhammad began to teach his followers things that he said Farad taught him personally. Many things that were not within the Supreme Wisdom Lessons. Elijah Muhammad began to teach his followers that Farad taught him about civilizations on different planets in our solar system, including Mars, where giants once lived. Elijah Muhammad taught that Farad spoke 16 different languages, including the languages of the birds, that he learned while studying the birds in Africa. Elijah Muhammad also began to teach about the mother wheel, a giant UFO a half mile by a half mile in size, which contained 1,500 smaller planes responsible for raising mountains on the planet Earth. This mother wheel was said to be constructed by scientists on the island of Nippon, aka Japan, in 1929 at the cost of $15 billion in gold. He also taught that the mother wheel and the weather would be used by Farad to destroy this present-day society and to bring about the hereafter as heaven on earth. Frustrated with his leadership and strange teachings that some of his followers had never heard or read before from Farad, Elijah Muhammad was ran out of town. Elijah Muhammad would be on the run for some time until he reestablished himself and the nation in Chicago. In order to establish the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad had to deal with a lot of the backlash and propaganda surrounding the mystery of Farad. Where was he born? How did he grow up? Who was his parents? Where did he go? No one had evidence of these answers, including Elijah Muhammad. But what he did have is the supreme wisdom lessons that were the basis of what he taught. Some of the propaganda got so bad that Farad was called a white man, and Elijah Muhammad's cult considered this Turkish ex-agent of the Nazis their god. Regardless of all of that, the teachings within the supreme wisdom lessons have been instrumental in producing some of the greatest contributors to our journey here in the West. All of these people were once members of the Nation of Islam, and there are far greater numbers of people who were directly influenced by these teachings that were never a part of the nation. All of this would forever change on February 25th, 1975, with the so-called death of Elijah Muhammad. This was devastating to the Nation of Islam, and many members of the Nation of Islam simply lost their way. Elijah Muhammad was seen as a messenger, a prophet, and how can a man of this stature be truly gone? Different factions begin to develop, and individuals amongst the ranks begin to rise up and claim leadership of the nation. In closing, W.D. Farad was a man. He was a human being. He didn't come to the West for us to worship him, to put him on a pedestal, or for us to pray in his name. He came to find his long-lost uncle and his relatives in order to connect us with our family in the East. He came to teach us who we were. It wasn't all about him. And maybe that's one of the reasons that he simply disappeared. Who knows? We are thankful for Elijah Muhammad because he established one of the most successful organizations for us here in the West. His influence is peerless, and the sacrifices that he and his earlier followers made to our growth and development is unparalleled. While there are some branches of the Nation of Islam that are guided by leaders who have stayed consistently true to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and Farad, there are other branches of the Nation of Islam who have departed from those teachings. As a scientist of life, I encourage you to do your own research and think for yourself. We already have enough followers out here, and we need many more leaders. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow at all. It just simply means that you should follow to the extent of learning to lead and think for yourself. Don't be misled, don't be mystified, and preserve the best part for yourself. Peace. Peace. It's great to see you again. Today I wanted to tell you about a very important person. He was a military veteran, a youth advocate, and a community organizer in Harlem, New York from 1964 to 1969. Another name for Harlem is Mecca, because Mecca is the place that everyone wants to be. Think about your city for a second and where your Mecca would be. Why was he important? Well, I'm so glad that you asked. It wasn't because he had a lot of money, because he wasn't rich. He wasn't a comedian, a singer, a rapper. Well, he was instrumental in creating some of the fundamental elements of what we now call hip-hop, and why hip-hop has a fifth element called knowledge of self. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that later. Nor was he a councilman, a mayor, a legislator, a senator, a congressman, or president of this here United States. He was like a superhero for children. but he didn't come down from the sky. Many children called him the father because he was like a dad. He told them to go to school, to treat each other fair, to help out in their communities, and not to talk about people. Sounds kind of familiar, right? He even taught them how to say peace when they greet each other and when they depart. Allah was recognized by the mayor of New York, Mayor John Lindsay, who sent his aide Barry Gotherer to meet and work with him. Upon meeting Allah, Barry noted in his book, The Mayor's Man, that he was dedicated to his community's well-being and educating the youth. In fact, following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, Allah and his 5% walked the streets of Harlem and stopped his own community from rioting, while many other communities around the country were destroyed. With the city's support, Allah created projects and activities for youth to keep them out of trouble, including picnics and trips on a plane. Allah wasn't a pastor, a politician, or a professor. He was a person who cared about making the world a better place, and he got up and did something about it. In 1967, Allah opened this cool school for youth called the Allah School in Mecca. It was cool because the youth got a chance to learn about things that they didn't learn in school, like supreme mathematics, what makes rain, hail, snow, and earthquakes, how to eat the right foods, and other things that taught them knowledge about themselves. Hey, the Allah School in Mecca is still in Harlem today, and you should visit sometimes. Maybe you might even see me there. Allah taught the youth that out of 100% of the people, you had 85%, 10%, and 5%. The 85% were most of the people who were easily led in the wrong direction. The 10% were the ones who were leading them in the wrong direction. And the 5% were the ones who were leading the people in the right direction. So those who learned from Allah about the right direction came to be known as Allah's 5%. Now here's something that I bet you didn't know. When hip-hop started in New York in the 1970s, many of the DJs, rappers, breakdancers, and graffiti artists were 5%ers or affiliated with the 5%. You ever hear about the golden era of hip-hop? Well, guess what was one of the main reasons the culture was rich? Yep, you got it, the 5%ers. The same way that hip-hop spread all around the world, so did the teachings of Allah. I told you he was a very important person. There are many other things to learn about Allah that I encourage you to check out for yourself. Like with anything, you have to study. What you may discover is the greatest story never told is yours. Peace.
And then I said you wasn't the only one. And then my mama told me not to be the one. Hey, 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 hey. I wasn't the one. You was messing with me. I was trying to believe.